In a massive chamber carved from the glowing stone of a floating city above the skies of Galvorn Prime, the Galactic Council gathered as they did every rotation. Representatives from dozens of powerful species sat in their hovering seats, discussing threats, politics, and conflicts that spread across the stars. They were ancient races, some with crystalline skin, others with tentacled limbs or bodies made of living energy, each proud of their place in the galaxy's order. On that day, the topic of discussion was a growing conflict between two superpowers, the Drexer Empire and the Cavor Dominion. Both sides had begun raiding neutral planets, and the Council feared this war would spread across the galaxy. But in the middle of serious strategies and worried arguments, one species brought up a forgotten world, a planet so far from the center of the galaxy that it was barely mentioned in Council records. That planet was Earth. The mention of Earth brought confusion at first. Some Council members had to search their memory banks to remember what species lived there. A few laughed quietly when they realized it was the home of the humans, a species labeled as emotionally unstable, technologically behind, and barely worth a second thought. A green-skinned ambassador from the Zalari species chuckled, saying that the humans still used burning liquid in their machines. Another, a tall, spider-like being from the Nithrax order, waved its legs dismissively and called humans primitive bipeds who can't even leave their star system without crashing into rocks. One after another, the Council members laughed, mocking the idea that humans could ever be a factor in galactic affairs. The Cavor representative, a shimmering creature with eyes like stars, calmly suggested Earth should be left alone, not because it was valuable, but because it was too insignificant to waste resources on. The Drexer representative, a hulking red-scaled warrior, laughed loudly and promised that if the war ever reached that dusty blue planet, it would be crushed in less than a cycle.as. The laughter echoed through the council chamber. No one noticed the quiet ambassador of the Ralzanan Ancient, species of watchers known for their silence. With glowing eyes that could see glimpses of the future, the Rolzan watched the mocking council members and said only one thing in a voice that silenced the room. You will remember Earth not because it was weak, but because you were wrong. No one responded. They had already returned to their jokes, and the warning was ignored. The council moved on to other matters. Earth had been judged unimportant, backward, and irrelevant. Far away, on the very planet the council laughed at, humans were going to work, sending messages through their devices, watching movies, arguing over politics, and dreaming about the stars. They were unaware that above their planet, deep in the void, sensors were tracking their movements. A Drexer scout ship, invisible to human radar, had arrived in orbit to observe. The commander of the scout ship scoffed at what he saw. A planet full of buildings with no energy shields, soldiers with bullets instead of plasma weapons, and vehicles that moved on wheels. He sent a report back to the Drexer fleet. Earth would be an easy target. The humans would panic. Their planet would fall quickly. But what the Drexer did not understand, and what the Council had forgotten, was that humans had never been given anything easily. Every step forward in their history was paid for with struggle. They had survived world wars, famine, disease, disasters, and even fought each other over lines drawn on maps. And through it all, they learned. They adapted. They kept going. Their technology may not have been the most advanced, but their minds were quick, and their spirits were hard to break. What they lacked in alien knowledge, they made up for in creativity, emotion, and pure, stubborn will. In the darkness of space, another Drexer ship moved into position. It carried weapons, soldiers, and the belief that this mission would be nothing more than a test. They were not invading a threat. They were bringing order to chaos. The commander gave the signal, and the ship descended toward Earth, cloaked from the skies, ready to land. But what they didn't know was that a small group of humans, deep in the Alaskan wilderness, had already spotted strange lights in the sky days earlier. A former Air Force pilot named James Walker, now living a quiet life as a bush pilot, had noticed odd changes in his instruments during a night flight. He told a few friends, and they told others. A quiet network of veterans, scientists, and hunters began sharing notes. Something strange was coming. They didn't know what it was, but they prepared anyway. The Drexer ship landed silently in the forest, its metal feet touching the snow. It assumed it had gone unnoticed. But within minutes, hidden cameras powered by human-made drones captured the landing. Within hours, James Walker and a small team of prepared humans reached the site. They wore winter gear, carried old rifles, and brought equipment built from scrap. It wasn't military grade, but it worked. When the Drexler soldiers stepped out of their ship, scanning the forest for threats, they didn't expect to be ambushed by creatures with such precise aim and such clever traps. 3 Drexler were captured alive. The others fled back into the ship and escaped, damaged and humiliated. The captured Drexar were studied in secret, not in labs, but in underground bunkers by scientists who once worked for defense agencies. The Drexar armor was cracked open. Their weapons were disassembled, tested, and copied. The language barrier was broken by human linguists in weeks. Information flowed. Plans were made. The world still didn't know what had happened, but the quiet corners of Earth, the military bases, the scientific minds, and the survivalists had begun to act. Without orders, without the council, and without fear, humanity was preparing. Back in the council chamber, the ambassadors had forgotten about Earth again. They laughed over other matters, smug in their belief that they controlled the galaxy. But far below their floating cities and golden towers, a message was beginning to echo from a distant blue planet. A message that would soon shake the stars. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not afraid. Humanity was waking up. And when humans wake up, they don't just survive. They fight. The night was silent over the dense forests of Alaska, the stars above twinkling like ancient watchers, unaware or perhaps waiting for what was about to unfold below them as the world slept in peace, unaware that their planet was no longer alone in its skies, thousands of miles above, hidden in low orbit behind advanced cloaking fields. A Drexler landing cruiser floated like a ghost ship in space, carrying a strike force of warriors trained in conquest, their red armor humming softly as energy weapons powered up and targeting systems scanned the land below for the right zone to land undetected, confident in their superiority, expecting nothing more than panic and surrender from what they considered a primitive race. But down below, far from cities and satellites, a silent movement was already taking shape. James Walker, former pilot and survival expert, sat in a snow-covered outpost, watching green lights blink across a radar screen hacked together from Cold War tech and salvaged parts, while beside him sat Nora, a retired engineer turned radio hacker, her fingers dancing across frequencies, listening for patterns that matched no known Earth signal, and when the cruiser's atmospheric entry created a barely noticeable pressure shift in the wind, they both looked at each other, silent understanding passing between them. It was happening. At 2:14 a.m., the Drexler ship entered Earth's atmosphere like a whisper, landing smoothly in the icy terrain near a frozen lake, its black hull blending with the night, and the ramp lowered with mechanical grace, releasing 6 Drexler scouts into the shadows, each of them scanning, searching, unaware that hidden beneath a nearby snowbank, James and his team were already in position, advanced but deadly accurate, and their trap was simple pressure mines, noise decoys, and thermal bombs wired to heat signatures, all primitive compared to Drexar tech, but effective when placed with human cunning. As the scouts moved toward what looked like an abandoned shack, the first trap exploded, throwing one Drexler into the trees while the others took cover, confused by the ambush in what was supposed to be an unguarded zone, and that confusion gave the humans their chance shots fired from 3 directions, not to kill, but to separate and isolate the Drexler, forcing them into fallback patterns that James had predicted based on previous scouting videos, patterns that led directly into the frozen lake where motion sensors triggered sub-zero grenades. That sent 2 more aliens collapsing in the ice, stunned and barely conscious. One Drexler, the team leader, activated a distress beacon, but it was instantly jammed by Nora's interference system, which sent back a false signal claiming the area was secure, delaying any reinforcements and giving the humans time to act. They moved in quickly, capturing 3 Drexar alive and forcing the others to retreat, their ship damaged by magnetic bursts planted on the snowbank's edge, technology that shouldn't have worked, but somehow did, because humans had taken what they learned from the first failed landing and made it better. made it dirtier, and most of all, made it unpredictable. And that was something the Drexler could not calculate. As the sun began to rise slowly, its light bouncing off the wreckage and footprints in the snow, the captured Drexler lay in an underground bunker, restrained with reinforced steel netting, while doctors, ex-military specialists, and engineers stood around them, not with fear, but with curiosity and determination. And the questions began not in alien languages, but in calm, patient English, with pictures, gestures, and slow repetition, because humans had always been good at making others talk, and even better at listening to the things they weren't meant to hear. One of the aliens, bleeding from a small wound, finally spoke a phrase that made Nora freeze. "This world will burn," it said. And she simply replied, "You tried," before walking out to send the footage to hidden contacts across the globe. Meanwhile, high above Earth, the Drexar command ship finally received the second signal, the real one, and realized their scouting party had been compromised. And the commanding officer, General Exarthul, growled in disbelief, smashing a console with his armored fist as he reviewed the footage intercepted from a damaged helmet cam. Humans moving with military precision, adapting within minutes, and not panicking like expected, not running, not begging, but hunting. For the first time in his career, he saw fear not in his enemies, but in his own soldiers' eyes. And he knew this would not be the easy victory the Council had promised on Earth. As governments slowly began detecting strange anomalies, crashed drones, missing satellites, and sudden EMP spikes, they began reaching out to each other in coded messages, quietly forming a coalition that included not presidents or kings, but field agents, scientists, hackers, and ex-soldiers, people who had already seen the signs and knew what was coming. And they had one goal: prepare the world before the sky fell. As James walked out into the cold morning, snow crunching under his boots, he looked up into the sky and said nothing, because deep down he knew this was only the beginning. The first landing had happened, and Earth was no longer ignored, no longer invisible. And if the galaxy thought humans were still primitive, they were about to learn the hard way that survival was written into their blood. And when pushed, humans didn't fall, they fought back. When the first Drexar assault finally came, it wasn't subtle or hidden like the scouting mission. They came with thunder, fire, and skies full of warships, believing fear would paralyze the humans. But Earth had changed in just days, and the Drexar didn't know they had already lost the element of surprise. Cities had prepared in silence. Factories once shut down now produced improvised weapons, and civilian hands trained by veterans were ready to strike with everything they had, not because they believed they would win, but because they refused to surrender. The first wave struck the Pacific coast, targeting communication towers and energy plants. But what met them wasn't panic, it was resistance, fierce and unpredictable, a mix of military tactics and street-born chaos. And every corner the Drexar turned led to explosions, ambushes, and brutal traps made from nothing more than scrap and willpower. James Walker led the charge in Seattle, turning a tech district into a battlefield of fire and metal, while Nora, hacking from a moving van, redirected enemy drones mid-flight to crash into their own forces, her fingers never stopping as she whispered coordinates into radios linked to dozens of hidden units spread across the ruined city blocks. In the mountains of South America, tribes joined forces with special forces, using jungle terrain and ancient ambush skills to destroy Drexar units with deadly precision. And in the ruins of Cairo, children acted as scouts, moving through the narrow alleys with coded messages that turned the enemy's strength into confusion. The galaxy had expected Earth to fall in days, but what they didn't understand was that humans had always survived war, had always adapted faster than expected, and when their backs were against the wall, they didn't collapse, they transformed. Underground bunkers became command centers, churches became field hospitals, and music played over broken radios to remind people that even in fire, they still lived. In the skies, fighter jets, once thought outdated, danced between Drexar warships, using speed and unpredictable moves to disable systems never meant to handle human chaos, while spaceports across Asia were secretly being prepared by rogue scientists and volunteers, using stolen tech from captured Drexar ships to build Earth's first interstellar crafts. Not perfect, not safe, but good enough to strike back. On the battlefield, The enemy grew frustrated, their thermal scans failed to pick up targets hidden under ice and mud. Their translations struggled to decode human slang and sarcasm, and their orders were intercepted, twisted, and used against them. One Drexer commander, known for his brutal record across 3 galaxies, was captured alive near the ruins of London, his transport brought down by a Molotov cocktail thrown by an old man who had fought in Earth's last World War, and when asked why he fought, the man simply said, "Because it's my home." Before walking away, across the stars, the Galactic Council watched in silence, their smug expressions fading as daily reports brought only bad news. Earth was still standing, and worse, Earth was fighting back. Harder with each day, what should have been an easy conquest had become a nightmare, with Drexer forces spread thin, exhausted, and slowly realizing they had underestimated the will of a species that had survived ice ages, global wars, and extinction-level threats without ever giving up. In a hidden base beneath the Arctic, leaders of the resistance gathered around a flickering hologram showing battle maps and energy flows, and James stood in the center, his voice calm but filled with fire, as he explained the next move: not to defend, but to strike, to push the enemy back, not just from cities but from orbit. Using a combination of hacked Drexar tech and raw human innovation, the plan was insane: board one of the enemy's damaged ships, override the system, and use it as a Trojan horse to reach their fleet's central command. And everyone in the room knew the risks, but none of them hesitated because they had learned something valuable in these days of fire. They didn't need to match the enemy's strength, only their weakness, and the Drexer's greatest weakness was pride. The mission began at night, under a storm, with lightning crashing around the scorched earth, and as James led the team into the broken hull of a Drexer dropship, Nora stayed behind, eyes locked on a screen as she whispered instructions, timing the overload of the core with military precision. And just as the enemy realized what was happening, it was too late. The ship launched, carrying within it a human virus of strategy, courage, and madness. And when it reached the fleet above, it exploded from within, taking half of the Drexar command structure with it. That explosion, seen from Earth's surface as a bright light in the sky, sparked hope in places that had only known fear for days. People came out of hiding, resistance grew stronger, and the enemy, once unbeatable, now looked lost. The humans had fought with fire and fury, not because they were the strongest, but because they refused to be forgotten, refused to kneel. And as their story spread across the stars through intercepted transmissions and captured recordings, other species began to listen, to whisper the name of Earth with a new kind of fear, not of what the humans were, but of what they were becoming. The galaxy had always thought Earth was just a blue planet, isolated and backward, filled with loud creatures too busy fighting each other to matter beyond their own skies. But that illusion shattered the moment Earth was attacked, because what followed was not a surrender, but a transformation that no one could have predicted. After the first wave of destruction, something ancient stirred deep in the hearts of humans, something not written in their books or coded in their systems, something that could not be measured by logic or technology. It was instinct, raw and powerful, a survival fire that had burned through their history again and again, while the Drexer believed they had broken Earth's spirit with their weapons and cruelty. They failed to see that they had only awakened a sleeping giant. Argued over politics, now shared supplies, and stood watch in silence, eyes sharp and ready. Something had changed inside the human soul. They were no longer just fighting back. They were evolving, learning from the enemy, adapting their stolen tech, building faster than ever before. And even those who once lived quiet lives were now soldiers, engineers, or scouts, each playing their part in a growing storm that was no longer defensive, but dangerously alive, deep underground, in old missile silos and mountain bunkers. Brilliant minds unlocked secrets of the enemy's technology, and what began as guesswork soon became invention. Fusion cores were repurposed into energy cannons, cloaking tech adapted into battlefield stealth systems, and ships that had once been crashed and abandoned were now flying again, painted with human symbols and guided by hands that refused to shake. In space, satellites once used for weather were turned into weapons, scanning enemy positions and feeding data to hidden artillery that struck with precision so sharp it confused the Drexer AI. The humans were not only surviving, they were gaining ground. and that terrified the Galactic Council because no species had ever pushed back like this. No planet had ever risen from ruin this fast, and as the war continued, whispers began to spread across the stars. Rumors of Earth's awakening, of humans who fought like demons but laughed like poets, who died screaming but never begged for mercy, and who built miracles out of trash. Alien mercenaries sent to suppress uprisings reported impossible tactics, soldiers fighting after being wounded, drones moving without orders, and a strange human madness that couldn't be predicted by simulations, a madness driven not by chaos but by hope. In the sky above the Atlantic, Earth launched its first prototype battlecruiser made from enemy tech, slow and unpolished but powerful. And when it entered the upper atmosphere, every resistance fighter on the ground looked up with wide eyes, because that ship was proof they were no longer just defending Earth, they were becoming a force that could reach the stars. In one of the ruined cities, James Walker stood on a half-collapsed rooftop, watching the sky burn as human and Drexar ships danced in deadly patterns. And beside him stood Nora, exhausted but focused, her hands covered in grease and circuits as she finished the last connection to a device that would overload the enemy's orbital relay. She smiled, not because victory was near, but because failure no longer scared them. They knew now that Earth would never return to what it was before, not after this awakening, and even if they fell, others would rise, stronger and wiser, carrying the fight beyond the clouds. This war had given them something the galaxy didn't expect: a purpose beyond survival, a unity forged in fire, and a name that was no longer a joke, but a warning. Earth, the primitive planet, was gone, and in its place stood something new, something terrifying, something alive with determination and rage. From the ashes of defeat, from the ruins of cities, and the grief of lost families, Earth had awakened, not as a victim, not as a prisoner, but as a rising for centuries. Humans looked up at the night sky, wondering what was out there, dreaming of stars, of distant worlds, of intelligent life. But when the truth finally arrived, it wasn't a peaceful message or a friendly visit. It was war, sudden and merciless, with ships tearing through the sky and cities burning under alien firepower. And yet, even in the darkest hour, humanity did not break. Instead, they adapted, learned, and turned pain into progress. And after years of chaos and loss, Earth rose from the ashes stronger than ever before, with united nations, rebuilt technology, and new ideas shaped by war and courage. The Galactic Council, once amused by the primitive species, now watched with concern as human ships began leaving Earth, not as refugees, but as explorers, diplomats, and warriors, their flags stitched with the scars of survival and their minds sharpened by the fight they never asked for, but won through sheer will. It was not a grand moment that marked their entry into the stars, but a quiet decision in a war room beneath the Pacific Ocean, where leaders of every kind, scientists, generals, thinkers, survivors, agreed that Earth could no longer remain a single-world civilization, not if it wanted to stay safe, and not if it wanted to grow. And so, the First Fleet was born, not from luxury or glory, but from necessity, its hulls forged from wreckage and hope, its engines running on hybrid alien tech, and its purpose clear: to reach, to learn, and to never again be caught unprepared. Their first contact mission was with a small border colony of the Hisari people, a cautious and quiet race known for watching rather than speaking, and when the human ships landed, the Hisari expected threats, impossible resilience, and curiosity that even war couldn't kill. Word spread quickly that humans had not only survived their war with the Drexar, but had used it to push beyond their limits, and now they were stepping into the galactic stage not with pride, but with fierce humility, carrying lessons carved deep into their bones. Over time, alliances began to form, fragile at first, built on mutual need, shared stories, and cautious trade. And humans, once mocked for their emotional chaos and unpredictable behavior, began to be respected for the very things that made them dangerous, because they did not follow patterns. They did not accept defeat, and they did not fear death in the same way others did. The council invited a human delegation to speak, expecting angry demands or dramatic speeches, but instead they were met with quiet honesty: representatives who spoke of rebuilding, of responsibility, of never again allowing Earth or any other world to suffer in silence. And slowly, the galaxy began to understand that these humans were not here to conquer, but to belong. And that was what made them truly powerful. Their technology, still rough compared to older races, advanced quickly, not because they were smarter, but because they were relentless, always learning, always pushing, and always questioning what others accepted as limits. Colonies followed first on the Moon, then on Mars, then further still, each one a mix of old Earth culture and new galactic influence, buildings made of steel and hope. Communities formed not just by humans, but by other species who found safety and meaning in their fight. Human fleets expanded, but never without purpose, and their captains, many of them veterans of Earth's war, taught discipline, compassion, and the will to protect those who could not protect themselves. And then came the moment that proved everything, the Battle of the Varnak Gate, when a rogue faction threatened to destroy a neutral system, and the humans, instead of fleeing, stood their ground, outnumbered but not outwelled, and held the line until reinforcement arrived, losing ships, lives, and years of work, but earning something far greater, trust. After that day, no one called humans primitive again, because they had shown not just strength, but sacrifice. And the Council voted, for the first time in history, to grant a new species full member status after less than a generation of contact. Earth was now part of the stars, not just in name, but in spirit, and the humans, once dreamers looking up, were now builders reaching out, shaping the future of a galaxy that had once doubted them. They brought change, sometimes too fast, sometimes too loud, but always forward, always burning with the same question that had started it all: what lies beyond? And now, with allies at their side and enemies learning to fear them, humanity walked the stars not as conquerors, but as survivors who chose hope over hate and action over silence. And with every ship launched, every treaty signed, and every life saved, they whispered a quiet promise to the stars: they would not forget where they came from, and they would never stop moving forward.